Okay, good. Well, Chris, thanks very much for agreeing to let us use one of your scores and devote some time to this interview.
Sure.
Everybody, needless to say, really knows a lot about you as a player. We've all been listening to your music for years, and those of us saxophone players envious. I remember hearing a recording that you made that you probably didn't even know was being made when Ted Piltzecker was running the Aspen.
Wow. Okay. That's a long
Remember
way
that?
back.
I
Yeah,
think
I
you
was
were
a
like 13 or
teenager. Yeah.
14,
Yeah.
something like that.
Something like that. I was very young when I went out to Aspen. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Ted is an old friend of mine, and somehow I got a recording of you playing Yesterdays, I think,
hmm
and supposedly the word on the street was you didn't know the tune. You had never played it before, but your ears took over, and the rest is history. So let me start. I'll kind of follow the format of the sample questions that I sent you ahead of time, so
Okay.
you kind of know where we're going to go. Although
I
those
mean, presumably,
questions,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and those questions may take us other places.
Sure.
Aside from Transatlantic and Songs for Anyone and the Imaginary Cities projects,
hmm
were there any other large ensemble work that you've done as a composer?
Yeah, there's music that was recorded, I think, with the WDR,
Ah,
band, that was never on an album, but I think it was kind of a concert's worth of music now that I'm thinking about it. And then there are things that haven't been then haven't been um, performed or recorded yet.
oh, okay.
There's actually something that's gonna get premiered in March in San Francisco. It's a big band with a vocalist and me.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
so that's sort of a new.
Excellent. And that is going to be recorded.
I'm not sure exactly how, when, where, what, but
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that they'll record it, but I can imagine after a couple of rehearsals and a live gig, it may not be something that I would be
Yeah.
quite ready to put out, but
Yeah.
maybe we'll get lucky. We'll see.
I think maybe that WDR, that may be on YouTube.
Some of that stuff, I think it might. Some of that stuff
Yeah,
might.
because I think I may have seen that, but
Mhm.
it's not been commercially released. I mean, the reason that I ask is your work is really for large ensembles. It's very mature. I would say as a writer. So I'm interested in digging into a little bit more of your background, not as a player, but things that you may have experiences you may have had writing and how you got that together basically.
Mhm. Mhm. I mean, just by doing it and by listening and paying attention. I mean, I th- I mean, I find that I write a lot, not necessarily for a large ensemble,
Oh,
but
sure.
but there's a lot of but there are a lot of tunes, that haven't ever been heard, and maybe um, some of them maybe I'll get around to someday, or maybe I'll just start anew, but I've always been a big believer in this. This is something that I say to students whenever they ask is that really the key to becoming a better writer is just write, just keep on writing, write, um, and learn from each time, you know.
Sure. Sure.
Um, and it's very helpful to be able to study scores. Um, I mean, at this point, I find that it's extremely useful. Just there's so much stuff on YouTube with all these classical scores up online. It's an amazing resource to be able to hear it and kind of see it and be able to, okay, what was that? How did that sound? I mean, that was something that obviously wasn't available when I was coming up, but I mean, that's an amazing resource there.
No,
So
YouTube
it's
has become an incredible resource.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so that I mean, I think that's really how I've how I've gotten to whatever level I'm at. I mean, I definitely find that whenever I hear something back, I learn something, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
Um,
That's true of all
and
of us, I think.
yeah, I guess this is how it works. I mean, you know, if you're fortunate, then you have a chance to hear it and then go back and edit it before it gets recorded.
Right. Well, and that's,
Um,
I always tell students, those are the best years of your life.
yeah,
Take everything out of it as you possibly can, because those are the opportunities you have to do rewrites. Let me hear that again after I've made those changes.
right.
Because that's a lot harder when you get out into the real world because time
Yeah,
is money.
yeah. Well, right, and it's just so hard to get the bodies together in the same room and get it done. Like it has to kind of be ready once people are in the room.
Right, exactly, exactly. I'm just curious in that regard. To me, I've always been a fan of the transatlantic recording because I think, in fact, when I was considering doing the second volume as a follow up to my first volume,
Mm-hmm.
which was just more big band
Hmm. Hmm.
writing, I was going to approach you about using something from transatlantic
Hmm. Hmm.
because I feel that the scores are very mature and very polished and so on. Of course, then COVID hit, and I started rethinking what I was going to do,
Right, right. Did
and
some.
asked myself, does the world really need another book about big band writing? And I didn't want the people in Volume Two also to feel like they were second class citizens because they weren't in, in Volume One. So the string idea is what hit me. But
Hmm. Hmm.
did you have a lot of time to polish that work before you actually did it?
Um, I actually now I'm trying to remember. No, that was afterwards. I had the chance to perform some other music. Um, yeah, that was definitely afterwards. That kind of had to be ready.
Yeah,
Um,
I
there
figured it
was
did.
there was fortunately the way that worked out uh, was was that there was a gig at Lincoln Center. So there was a couple nights at Jazz at Lincoln Center and a few days of rehearsal before that. So we really that was the fortunate thing is we got to actually spend some time together and play it live twice before
Oh, good. Yeah.
going into the studio. That was a huge thing in helping that move forward. Um, that we did have that time. So I think we had spent a good 5 days, like maybe 3 days rehearsing it, and then a couple days um, doing gigs, and then 3 days in the studio.
Yeah, well, that's the
So
ideal way to make.
it was fantastic. Yeah, it
Yeah,
was. It was.
absolutely. Did you have that advantage with Imaginary Cities? I suspect not.
No, that's what I'm talking about. Is
Oh, Imaginary Cities. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That's sort of yeah, the way that came about. I mean the transatlantic. I don't even remember. To
It
be
goes
quite
back a
honest.
few
Yeah,
years.
it's a few years ago. Yeah.
As Jim McNeely uses the expression, I have to get in my Wayback Machine.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's great that you actually had that time to rehearse and
Yeah.
do some concerts before you actually took
Yeah.
it into the recording studio. Um, how did you conceive of writing for strings? And did that addition to the ensemble cause you to obviously write differently? Because you've done a lot of small group writing,
Sure.
tons of small group writing,
Right.
but the string thing is like a whole nother
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah. I mean that really I studied some scores just to even begin getting my feet in those waters.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, of course, I've listened to string quartets for years, but that's such a thing. There's so many amazing examples of how that's been done, um, and I tried to use that,
Hmm.
and not imagine that I was writing for horns, which I'm much more kind of comfortable, also just because that's what I do, and I'm used to that feeling.
Yeah.
Um, so that was a bit of work. I mean, the entire thing was a bit of a stretch because it's such a strange instrumentation. I really thought it would be
Very
easy.
strange, which is what drew me to it, actually.
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of why I liked it. It was like it's not really one thing or another. It's kind of like you've got the two basses in there. You have the vibes, guitar and piano, so lots of percussive harmony instruments.
Yeah, speaking of the two basses, I'll jump ahead in my questions.
Yeah.
What possessed you to I have a feeling I could maybe intuit it, but what possessed you to use two basses?
I guess there were some reference points that I was thinking of. I was thinking of um, Coltrane records. There's a handful where he uses two basses. Africa Brass,
Right, right,
very very effective.
right,
Um, and we had done a week. I mean, it's funny. The underground band, was a band without a bass player because it was Craig playing the Rhodes.
right, right.
But there were some times that, if he wasn't available to do it, then I would hire a bass player. And there was a week we did at the Vanguard with Nate Smith and Adam Rogers and me and FEMA and Scott. So I had heard those two play together, and they've been, we've all been friends for a long time. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
knew that, there would be that familiarity both personally and musically. Um, that I thought that would be kind of an interesting sound, an interesting and unusual sound, and kind of leave it, kind of lead into some different areas. I mean, some of what I was, thinking of was a bit of an African sound, you
Yeah,
know, and all
yeah.
these layers of rhythms, and different kind of things that lock in different ways,
Hmm.
um, which was how I sometimes wrote the rhythm section. I mean, it gave me a lot of flexibility too, because Scott could play with the bow and make it a string quintet as
Right,
well,
exactly.
you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Um, yeah, it was an interesting challenge, I really did have to sit and let it marinate for a long time. I think I talked to McNeely about it. I think
Oh,
I
did
said,
you really?
I
Yeah.
said, Jim, I think I've lost my way. Like I've written all this stuff and I think I'm going to throw it all away. And he's like, that means you are on the right track.
The
Which really
perfect
did help,
McNeely
I
response. Yeah,
mean, especially, I mean, since I have such respect for him as a writer, he's just,
we all do.
yeah.
Yeah.
I went, okay, if Jim says it's okay, then I'll keep going.
Yeah. Well, to me too, the responsibilities of and the choice of going with electric versus acoustic based
Mhm.
on who's soloing made a
Right.
lot of sense to me.
Yeah, yeah. That was another thought, was
Yeah,
that they could both. I mean, they could both play under solo, but it was nice
right.
it kind of gives you an electric ensemble and an acoustic ensemble within the same
Yes.
group. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if you have a piano and a guitar in the ensemble.
Right. Which there was that too. I mean, you could
Exactly.
do electric bass and electric guitar,
Yeah.
or acoustic piano and acoustic bass. It could
Right. And
go
and
all the
and with a
way.
mallet player, you had your choice of
Yeah.
vibes or marimba or a
Marimba. Yeah.
xylophone or
Yeah.
and you made use of all that. Yeah, I just was really intrigued by it, which is what kept attracting me to the record. And then of course the it came down to the choice of what was the best tune,
Right.
which
Yeah.
we went back and forth on that a little bit, but
Yeah.
in the end it was all about um, I think helping readers. When I look at the 10 scores that we use in the book, they're all very different and are sort of coming at this problem of
Mhm.
an interesting challenge, maybe is a better way to
Yeah.
put it, of combining strings
Strings with
with
rhythmic. Yeah.
exactly. In fact, the name of the book is Strings and Other Things
Yeah. Right.
because it's really like all over the place,
Yeah.
from very large, what I'd call studio orchestras
Right.
that are closer to symphonic in size to
Right.
these more
Right.
chamber-like works. Um, I'm curious, were there things that you tried in terms of integrating strings in this context
Mhm.
that didn't work kind of as you thought they would? And then vice versa, were there things that worked great beyond your kind of dream?
Um, in general, I'd say everything worked, as I recall.
Okay.
I mean, um, I imagine that the process of, you know, all the editing and throwing away that I did, I think I went through all the possibilities where I went, yeah, that's just not going to work. You
Right.
know?
Right.
Or it's going to work, but it's going to sound kind of ordinary or whatever. I was always going back and forth about that.
Sure.
Um, I mean, I was definitely using the fact that we were in the studio, to help,
Yeah,
because obviously, with that many instruments on the stage and only four strings, um, acoustically, the strings needed help. They needed to be, um, through mics and everything like that. And when you have a chance to be in the studio, then of course you can do whatever you want.
yeah,
You have
exactly.
enough isolation. So
Yeah, I
I
was actually going to get into that, was the whole
yeah,
issue of sort of dynamic balance
it
within
was
the
tricky.
ensemble.
It was tricky,
That's
but
it's
everyone just
always
had to really
tricky with
listen.
strings, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, it's always tricky, and especially, I think when you got that many other instruments,
Yes.
but everyone played so musically, and everyone kind of understood that that's what the thing needed. That when the strings were playing, maybe, doesn't need to be flat out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But there were some times that maybe there'd be a solo and the rhythm section really does get going, and then there's string backgrounds, and you needed to push that
Yeah.
fader.
Slide the faders up a little. Yeah. And then of course when you did it live, you probably used sound reinforcement for the
Of
strings.
course, of
Yeah.
course.
And
Yeah.
had
I mean,
somebody.
it just really wouldn't work without that. But I mean, like
I mean, it
once
wouldn't
you have
work
an
with
electric guitar and electric bass, I mean, you need electricity anyway just to have any
right,
sound.
right, right,
It's
right.
already in that zone.
And it probably wouldn't have been as effective as it was with just any old string quartet either.
No, I knew the people that I was calling, and that they'd be able to deal with stuff like that. I mean, I feel like it's getting, the other occasions now that I've had a chance to do this music with maybe some younger musicians, and in Europe and in it seems to me that there might be kind of a newer generation of string players that's a little more comfortable with this way of playing where it's like you have
Yeah.
to groove.
Yeah,
Um,
you have a rhythm section and you got to stay with it. There's
right,
no
right.
yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you make that comment because a couple of other people in this writers in this project have said the same thing.
Hmm.
That there's kind of an increasing sensibility and savvy among the younger players that are coming up. And for what reason, maybe no one knows, but probably what they're just exposed to,
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
rather than decades earlier where they just weren't.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, we still have to be careful of what we ask them to do
Right.
as composers. I don't think they swing well. It's
Yeah,
very,
no,
very,
right, right. That's just not what I'd use strings for if I really want to have. I mean, unless it's a certain effect, like
right.
writing like a bebop line. I mean,
Yeah.
that's there's so many things that strings are amazing at, and that might not really be one of them. So
No, that's way down the list.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's way down the list. And I noticed like almost every score that I've examined, you didn't bother to deal with indicating up bow, down bow, all
No,
that stuff, and
no,
you
because
just
I
left that
figured
to
they
them.
know they know much more about it than I do, and um, yeah, I just figured there wasn't any sense in me even making a guess, because I would just probably muddy up the works and they'd end up changing
Yeah,
what I wrote anyway. Yeah.
yeah. I think that there are very few occasions where I would feel confident enough, and they're sort of those obvious moments where,
Well,
sure, I want consecutive down bows
yeah,
here
right.
because I want the psycho in the shower scene or
Right,
something.
exactly. Right.
you know, yeah. I also noticed that you didn't write. I put one in. I took
Mhm.
the liberty to do that. Maybe you saw that, but you didn't write a drum part.
No, no,
Did
no.
you give him a part like a?
I think I gave him. I would imagine I gave him a bass part, but now I'm wondering which bass. I might
Yeah,
have made some kind of composite part.
yeah,
You know,
like your
um,
lines on it and
yeah,
some of the string figures or something.
yeah, and I mean, it's kind of the same with a lot of music that I've written. There just doesn't hasn't been a need. You
Yeah,
know, usually if I give them a bass part, all the information that they're going to need is on that, and we can work out whatever
right.
other things are more specific. I mean, if there was really some pattern on the drums that I wanted very specifically, that I would then I would do that.
Right,
But
right.
you know, but by and large, I kind of know that a musician of that caliber is going to come up with something better than what I can would
Yeah,
think of to play, or maybe just different and interesting, you know.
yeah,
So I kind
exactly.
of don't want to be. I mean, that's a big secret of writing for small groups. I think is is knowing how specific to be, but then how when to let it go, and to maybe make sure that there are those moments that are not quite specific, so that something you didn't think of could happen. You know.
Right, right. I know years ago when I had a small group, I never wrote drum parts.
Yeah.
We'd run it down and he'd figure it out, and he'd frequently come up with stuff that I didn't even imagine,
Exactly. Right.
because I'm not a drummer.
Yeah.
And I think with larger ensembles, there's the trap where the drummer gets so absorbed in trying to read the chart
Right. Right. Right.
that it's like they've got corks in their ears. I mean, they're much better off if they just let their ears kind of be their guide.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's like, certain things that need to be caught, but as far as making music out of the whole thing, so,
Right,
it's
right,
like the more you can, I mean, that's the amazing thing about having a drummer, it can really bring everything together in a certain way. But if they're not hearing the overall picture, sometimes it's hard.
right, right. I'll ask you to think back on specifically writing this piece from the suite of
The,
movements.
the one, I mean, just to make sure, the one that you're talking about is the one that starts with the pits, like the kind of African.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, yeah. It's part two of the dualities.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I assume you probably started off with writing a lead sheet
Yeah, I think I had a basic tune. Yeah.
and then thought about how you were going to develop it from there.
Yeah, because I mean, again, it's been a long time since I've played this music or heard it, but yeah, there's a basic core, I don't remember the form, but like AAB kind of form tune.
Yeah, and there's kind of a C in there that only
Yeah,
comes up once or twice.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, I think I had the basic
yeah.
tune and groove and worked from that. Yeah.
What kind of tools do you use when you're writing? Do you use a piano? Do you use your horn? Do you use a sequencer? Do you use Sibelius or all of the
I
above?
kind of all of the above. I mean, I write into Sibelius, and I do find that it can be very helpful to, sometimes avoiding some real orchestrational mistakes just in the sequencer. I mean, since I'm
Yeah.
really not an expert, that really can sometimes save me from doing something stupid.
Oh, that's
um,
true with all of us. It's the greatest sketch pad in the world.
I mean, it's amazing to think, to imagine writing The Rite of Spring without that, without any of, you know what I mean? Like hearing, that's just one example, but the level of detail in those,
Oh yeah.
words, like it's, that's a level of craft that, I just can't even imagine. I just marvel at, as we all
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that is very helpful. I use the piano a lot in writing,
Hmm. Yeah.
and just in my overall kind of musical life, like working on music, there's a lot that I do at the piano,
Uh-huh.
and I definitely use the horn too. I mean, um, I've kind of learned the hard way. Um, you have an idea for a tune, it sounds great on the piano, but if I don't think about how I'm going to deliver the melody, because in a way, usually I'm kind of like the singer or something, and
Right.
if it's an awkward thing to play, then it should be changed, even if it works. You know what I mean?
No, I
So,
know completely. Yeah.
so I do find that that's helpful sometimes, is just to get the horn out, and go, okay, well, is that enjoyable to play? You know?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, because it's really all about giving the players
Right.
the security to make the music happen the way you're hearing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And if you throw them some bizarre curves,
Right. I mean, sometimes there's just something that's difficult, and then that's how you're hearing it, and it's just hard, and it
yeah,
needs to be that hard.
yeah,
But I find, of course, I have many, many experiences where I have the feeling like, it didn't have to be this hard. It could be written much simpler, and still have the effect, but be stronger because it's more comfortable to play, So I always try and go through enough editing where I, you know, manage to catch that. And it's, it's not something that I can really deliver in a day. I mean, I guess if you're writing in a kind of a formulaic way, I guess, there's things that I could do like that. But when I'm really trying to write something that's expressive, I kind of have to give myself a fair amount of time and, uh, be kind of stuck and sleep on it and then wake up the next morning and, oh, there's the solution, um, kind of have to build that much time into it for me.
I'm glad to hear that. It makes me feel better because I mull over things sometimes too long, I think, but better that I think than
Then
you
just
know,
slapping something
rushing.
off.
Yeah, yeah, dashing something off and rushing that whole process because the end result maybe isn't what you're going to want to
Yeah.
what you're going to be happy with. I
Right.
think that that's particularly the case too with it's interesting, particularly with some of the younger um, composers. There's two or three in this batch of 10
Mhm.
because we're actually starting with a piece, an Eddie Sauter piece, Pan.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
From I wasn't going to do that, and then the more I thought my way through this book, I thought, well, why not talk about some of these really
Yeah.
important people that sort of opened the door for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it starts with one of those sort of things.
Yeah.
But some of the younger people are doing more with mixed meter, odd meter, shifting meter,
Hmm.
and this problem I think that comes up in doing that is it's got to feel natural. It
Yeah.
has it can't feel like it is a strange bizarro meter, but
Well, it has
because
to just be that that's how the music goes. I mean, like this particular piece, I'm trying to remember what meter it's in. It's not in. It's in 11 or something.
yeah,
It
yeah,
is a mixed meter thing, but that's something that I always think about whenever I'm writing anything with a mixed meter is that it has to just be, well, that's how the tune has to go. If it can be in 4 or 3 and and more effective, then it should absolutely be in 4 or 3. And that's what
right.
it's.
Well, that's my point is that if it doesn't feel natural,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I
and
mean, the other side of that is that, like, well, maybe some things that don't feel natural at the beginning, you have to get used to it, and maybe the players have to get used to it, and the listeners have to get used to it. So, you know, but yeah,
right,
there's a balance because there are definitely things that I've played that are in odd meters, and I'm like, this just doesn't feel good. It's like,
that's my point.
yeah,
Yeah,
right,
yeah, that's my point.
yeah,
In fact, in some of those situations, if the writer maybe had thought about it, they could have come up with the same feel
right.
had they have expressed it metrically differently.
That's another thing is just how to write out the thing, how to divide the bars
Exact. That's my
in
point.
a
Yes,
way to make it much more easy to conceptualize and then to play. Yeah,
exactly.
that's a big deal. I mean,
It's a huge deal.
you know, Stravinsky, I see that so much. Like, I'll hear the music, I'll hear it metrically in a certain way, and then I see that he wrote it out a completely different way. I mean, at a certain point, at a certain level of complexity, I mean, there are different ways that you can write the same thing out, and maybe people might make different decisions based on whatever their
Yeah,
background, just how they're hearing it.
exactly, exactly. And then there's that whole issue of player courtesy if it's for a larger ensemble, and
Yeah.
they have to read this thing.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
Then you
amazing to me to look at some of these modern scores and imagine being in the orchestra and trying to, and also, I mean, also, since I just don't have the background as a classical musician, I've never, as a saxophone, I never played in an orchestra. I mean, watching these guys, like, where is one, like, it's
yeah.
like what, like, and somehow they're all playing together, but it's
Well,
a big thing.
having played in orchestras in my lifetime, um, I too sometimes had to simply not look at the conductor
Right, right. Just
because there's a
play.
conducting style
Right.
where certain conductors they don't expect a response with the
Until
ictus
right,
till
right.
after the
So
downbeat.
after the yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And
Very
that
important to
would
me.
drive me nuts.
Yeah.
So I would minimally look at the conductor
Yeah.
and just play with the ensemble time because
Right.
that visual thing was not helping me at all. And that's probably because I came at playing in an orchestra as a jazzer playing in an
Right,
orchestra.
right, right.
And we're used to, you know,
Yeah.
the rhythm
That means
section.
that means yeah, that's where
Yeah, exactly. The groove is here.
seems like a simple concept to me, but
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, one of the questions I was going to ask you was whether you envisioned another large ensemble project, and you already answered that.
yeah, I already have something. I mean, it's basically already. I got to send the I have to send the parts out and everything. But
Great.
yeah.
Anything down the pike with strings?
Well, I mean, during the pandemic, I had a chance to write a lot of music.
I bet.
So yeah, I mean, as I recall, I'm trying to even remember what I wrote now. I think there's a several movement piece with rhythm section and like chamber orchestra.
Oh, nice.
And then there's a piece, I think it's probably, with improvisation, probably a 11, 12 minute piece with, I think just me and strings. I was like, can I write something without, having the familiarity of a rhythm section, just saxophone and strings. So, I sort of wrote it in the middle of when nothing was going on, thinking that whenever hopefully I'll have a chance to get it performed. It might be years after I first thought of it, but I'll be able to look at it and go, okay, well that works and that doesn't. But so I didn't really worry about having it ready to perform tomorrow, you know.
Right.
But it's all written. It's all scored. So
Wonderful.
yeah. So there is definitely stuff.
Well, there's one, I think it's the last chapter that has a piece for strings. Well, the first chapter and the last chapter. The
Mhm.
Sauter, of course, had no rhythm section. It
Mhm.
was just Getz and the string
Yeah.
group.
Right.
And you may
And Roy
know,
Haynes just kind of came in and played over it, right?
and that wasn't planned originally,
Oh, that's
exactly.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that was almost an afterthought. But the last I think it's the last chapter, is a score from a recording that Tim Garland did.
Oh yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
He's done a lot of interesting work.
He can really write.
He's got excellent background. Yeah, yeah. Um, so this particular piece uses a pianist who's informed by jazz, obviously,
mhm,
but no rhythm section at all.
mhm.
The strings are basically the rhythm section.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, it opens up so many doors.
yeah, yeah.
Um, in terms of advice, I always like to ask the writers at the end of our interview, um, particularly now that I think strings are being used more. They're being brought into one of our old UT students, Helen Sung, just came out
Oh
with a
yeah, I just saw
terrific.
him the other day. Yeah.
Yeah, she has a great new record out
Mm,
with a string quartet, the Harlem
mhm,
Quartet,
mhm.
and yeah, I think it's just been out a couple of months or so. But there's more and more of this, and I think more and more composers have finally begun to discover how best to make that marriage, work,
Yeah, yeah,
and not place demands on the strings that are not appropriate, and vice versa.
right.
Um, so, with the experiences you've had so far, what kind of advice do you have to writers who are thinking about wanting to write more with involving strings?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing would be probably the same thing I said at the beginning, which is just go ahead and write, like write a lot and experiment. We don't always have the chance to get to hear stuff, but
That's the
definitely
biggest
the
problem.
more you do it, even if you get to hear it on your sequence, the more you're going to get to do it. And if it is possible to organize at least just a reading, you know, do it, make this
Right.
stuff happen. I mean, That's well, that's a situation musicians have always been in to a certain extent, but maybe more and more these days is like, if we want something to happen, we kind of have to figure out some way to do it ourselves. It's hard to know. I mean, especially when it comes to money, how do you fund it? But
Right.
um, but the more you can just do it and hear your work, the better it's going to be.
Well, in the
And
playback software now,
yeah, it's at the level where you can start to hear what it really is going to be like.
if
Yeah.
you spring the extra dollars, and it wasn't terribly expensive for the instrument set, it's the orchestral instrument set.
Right.
What is it called? Note?
I know what you're talking about.
You
Yeah.
know what? For
Yeah.
Sibelius.
Yeah. Yeah. I forget the name, but yeah.
I mean, the saxophone sounds awful,
Right. Right.
but but the strings sound terrific.
Yeah.
So you actually can come pretty close in your little home studio
Yeah.
as a writer to hearing what you're really going to hear.
Yeah.
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 And
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I mean, I was just trying to think of like where else to take it besides just write a lot and see if you can hear it.
I think that that's the best advice.
Yeah.
You have to almost, well, you do, not almost, you do, I think, approach writing the same way that you approach playing your instrument.
Right. Right.
You got to touch it as often as possible
Right. Just
and for
write
as
it.
long as you can.
Right.
And if you don't sit down and write with a similar kind of involvement and sequence every day,
Right.
um, to sort of find a routine that works for you
Yeah.
and find some time, whether it's at the piano or, you
Yeah.
know, and I don't know about you, but I think there's been a danger with a lot of young writers. I know that I saw when I was teaching, particularly when all these digital tools, the computer,
Yeah.
they abandon this
Right.
and this,
Yeah.
and they were writing right to the computer. And to me, there's still an advantage, particularly in the early stages
Right.
of developing a new piece or sketching something, of using the old, pushing the pencil on the paper.
Right. Right. I mean, that was kind of the other part of what I was trying to think about how to say is I mean, it involves kind of studying the music that you love, how it sounds, studying how that's put together. The same as, as a saxophone player, I listen to Sonny Rollins and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's he doing to get that sound? What's he doing to get that articulation?
Yeah.
Kind of the same thing with writing, which does mean kind of getting out of that head of, you know, the sequencer kind of writing. You know,
Yes.
I think
Yes.
it's very important to try and imagine humans playing it and write stuff from that angle. Which was, again, if you don't have the experience of ever having done that with people, then I guess it's, it makes it that much harder to do. But I mean, I find that it's very, very, very useful to have these, digital tools.
Oh, absolutely.
But I make very strong effort to try and think as if I'm not using them. Uh, and yeah, in the sketching stages, it's just sketching stuff out. Now it's very hard to read. It's not like it's anywhere near a finished form, but just
Doesn't
to
have
get
to be.
ideas down, that's what I do too. Or I just record myself playing it,
Yeah.
and then, okay, well, have that, which it helps to have enough chops to at least begin to, do some of it.
Right. Right. Well, that sort of replicates the old days where I remember putting a cassette recorder on top of the piano
Yeah, right.
and hitting record and just,
Exactly the same. Yeah.
yeah. And then of course you got to transcribe what it is you liked,
Exactly.
which you don't have to do now.
Right. Well, now, right, that's all already notated for you.
'Cause
I
it's
mean, it always
there.
has to be edited, but it's all there. It's amazing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Chris. This has been a wonderful opportunity for me, and hopefully the people who buy the book and check out the interview to see where you're going now and where you're going to go tomorrow. Who knows where you're going to go tomorrow?
Who knows?
Yeah. And that's the fun of it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thanks again for your time and being part of the project.
Yeah, thanks for
Let me let
doing
me
it. I'm really
let
happy
me
to get the music out there too. Yeah.
let